Hi, I'm John Stockton.
And I'm Ken Rutgers.
At The Ultimate Assist, together we offer straightforward insights and expert conversations to help you take control of your life, your health, and your freedom. Today we've invited experts on the world of fluoridation. Mr. Rick North has been a nonprofit health manager for most of his career. 21 years he spent with the American Cancer Society, and 5 of those years as the CEO of the Oregon chapter. For 7 years, he worked for an organization called Physicians for Social Responsibility in their Safe Food program. Finally, he spent 12 years volunteering to oppose fluoridation. Michael Connett is a second-generation fluoride fighter. His father wrote the book, The Case Against Fluoride, and Michael was a successful lawyer that just won a landmark case against the EPA with the federal court. In this, they determined that fluoridation causes damage to the IQ of our children. He's a big man in the world of litigation. He's changing the world through litigation, all on this fluoridation topic, and he's a special guest, and we're grateful to have him today. So thank you for joining this special episode. We will see you on the other side. Hi, and welcome to The Ultimate Assist. I'm John Stockton, along with my co-host and partner in freedom, Mr. Ken Rutgers.
Morning.
We have a couple special guests today, Mr. Rick North and Michael Connett. Guys, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Great. Good. Thank you for having us.
Well, we're excited to have this conversation because our conversation today is about fluoride. Now, fluoride, one of the most toxic elements, it's a toxic waste that people would have to dispose of. And somehow it's gotten into our drinking water by choice. This is going to be a great topic. And I think what we need to start with is the home run right now that, Michael, you've been able to accomplish. There's been a heck of a court ruling on the EPA just in recent months here that has kind of changed the outlook on fluoride maybe throughout our country. You want to comment on that?
Yes. I have been in court for the past 7 years in a case against the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, about the neurotoxic effects or neurodevelopmental effects of fluoride exposure and whether water fluoridation, adding fluoride to drinking water, whether that poses a risk of neurotoxicity, particularly IQ loss in children. And after extensive expert testimony from government scientists, experts funded by the NIH, 17 days of trial, the court, a federal district judge in Northern District of California, ruled this fall that fluoridation poses an unreasonable risk of IQ loss. And the court ordered the EPA to take action to address this risk. So the court was convinced and persuaded by the evidence that fluoride affects the brain and is able to lower IQ in children. And this, I would add, is an Obama-appointed judge in the federal court.
Well, I think that does make a difference. I mean, one of the things we've been seeing with this or COVID or anything else is who that judge was appointed by is crucial in the decisions that come out. So this was a long time battle. I mean, it sounds to me like this has been going on for years.
It has been. We filed the case in April of 2017. We had not one, but 2 trials in the case. And as I said, with extensive testimony, and we were very fortunate to be able to call to the stand the scientists who are conducting these birth cohort studies funded by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. And these birth cohort studies, what they're doing is they measure the fluoride levels in the pregnant mom, and then when the children are ages 3, 4, 6, and 12, they do IQ tests. And then they see if there's any correlation between the child's IQ score and the fluoride levels that were documented in the mother's body. And these studies have consistently shown that, yes, there is an association. And that association remains even when you control for all of the kind of factors that can influence IQ, like the mother's education or the family's economic status or exposures to other toxic compounds like lead and mercury. So these are rigorous studies vetted by the NIH and extensively peer reviewed, and were very important at trial. And we had the scientists who authored these studies testifying in court, and that was significant. We also, John, were able to call some of EPA's own scientists to the stand who testified. One of them testified that, yes, the data from animal studies supports the biological plausibility of fluoride damaging the brain in humans. And the EPA's own experts did not dispute, and this is important, EPA's experts did not dispute that fluoride is a neurotoxicant. They did not dispute that fluoride damages the brain. They did not dispute that fluoride lowers IQ. The only dispute was, what are the levels that cause these effects? And do we have enough certainty to take regulatory action? So at this point, we now know that we are adding a neurotoxicant to water with fluoridation. And the only question is, what is the precise dose, and how does that dose vary based on an individual susceptibility for causing IQ loss? And that's the status. That's the state of affairs as we sit here today.
How did you get them to say such things in an era of misinformation where people are always trying to preach their gospel, so to speak? How did you get these guys? Did they have a case of enlargement of the heart or something? How did you get them to talk and say the things like that?
Well, they were cornered by the science. I mean, the science, there's a large number of studies, both in animals and in humans, linking fluoride exposure to effects on the brain. So they were hard pressed to deny that. And thankfully, their experts were candid, surprisingly so, with some of their testimony. And that, in the court's ruling, John, which is very detailed, very thorough, 80 pages, the court repeatedly cites the testimony of EPA's own experts to support the judge's conclusions. So,
well, how much volume is involved? So you said they talked about the dosage, basically. So the amount of stuff, fluoride, that's in the water is the crucial point here. So what are those points, and kind of make it clear so that average people can understand how much is too much?
Right. So we currently are adding 0.7 parts per million to the water. That's 0.7 milligrams per liter of fluoride. That's the so-called optimal level for preventing tooth decay. Now, we already have studies, those birth cohort studies that I was talking about earlier that are funded by the NIH. Those studies were looking at 0.7 parts per million, and they found significant associations between the mom's exposure and the child's IQ. So we have data today finding effects at the so-called optimal level. But to be fair and to be clear, most of the studies, and there's over 70 of them looking at fluoride and IQ, most of these studies are looking at higher levels, generally over 1.5 parts per million, okay? And that's where you see that the body of evidence is principally at those higher levels. But we already have data finding effects at the lower levels too. And I should add that those studies at the lower levels are the highest quality studies to date funded by the NIH. So the court's analysis, the court basically said, listen, we have data showing effects at 0.7. It may not be conclusive, and it's not conclusive, but we have so much data just a hair above what Americans are getting every day that we do not have anything close to a margin we can feel comfortable with. We are so close to the hazardous level right now. And we're talking hundreds of millions of Americans every day are getting doses of fluoride that are precariously close to those levels that are consistently finding adverse effects on the brain. And the court said, that's unreasonable. We're too close. We do not have any assurance of safety at all with this program.
Well, it doesn't seem like it should even have to be that close. You know, if something's toxic at a certain level, we shouldn't be mass supplying it to every citizen. It just seems absurd. So you've established, it sounds like you established that very clearly to this court, that it's bad for you. It hurts you. What about the benefits? I mean, when I grew up, we had fluoride pills they handed out. I remember hiding them under my pillow. Mom would give them to me and I wouldn't take them. Lucked out there a little bit because my IQ is clearly still way up there. But what are the actual benefits? Is that part of the case at all, the benefits of in terms of cavity reduction?
The benefits were initially part of the case. We had a lot of expert testimony on the benefits, but ultimately the court decided that the benefits would not be part of the trial because benefits are not relevant to determining whether this is a risk. So the benefits were not part of the trial. But here's what we did learn about the benefits as part of the expert depositions in the case. We learned and confirmed that fluoride's predominant, if not exclusive, benefit to teeth comes from topical contact, not from swallowing it. Now, John, you mentioned taking pills or fluoride pills when you were young. Those pills were based on the assumption that you needed to swallow fluoride when you're young, as your teeth are developing, and that's where you get the benefit. And that whole understanding was flipped on its head in 1999 when the CDC conceded that the predominant benefit is topical. Now, what are the implications of that? Well, one of the implications, as the CDC admitted in this case under oath, is that there are no benefits to the baby, whether in the womb or the first months of infancy. There are no benefits at all from fluoride exposure, including fluoridated water. And why is that important? It's important because that period of life in the womb and the first 6 months of life, that's when the brain is particularly vulnerable to suffering harm from toxic exposures. You don't have a blood-brain barrier fully formed, so chemicals have access to the brain, and the brain's rapidly developing and more vulnerable. So we have a situation now with water fluoridation where in this early period of life, you have a clear risk with absolutely no offsetting benefit. So from a risk-benefit standpoint, you have a risk, you don't have a benefit, right? And shouldn't we have a water supply that's safe for pregnant moms and formula-fed babies? Like, public water should be something that pregnant moms can use. And public water should be something that you can give the baby, right? So that's one, I think, key thing that we learned in this case. And again, that was testimony from the CDC that there's no benefits early in life. And then speaking more broadly in terms of the older age groups in the population, the benefits of fluoridation, we now know, are much less than previously believed. And just by one example of that is in October of this year, the Cochrane collaboration, which is sort of this gold standard organization for reviewing the effectiveness of medical treatments, the Cochrane collaboration published a report on the efficacy of fluoridation. And they concluded that in current conditions, where you have a widespread availability of fluoride toothpaste and fluoride mouthwashes and professionally applied dental products, that the benefits of fluoride are hard to discern and may not even exist. The Cochrane collaboration said there may no longer be a benefit at all from water fluoridation. And that is consistent, I should add, with the fact that most of Europe, the vast majority of Europe, does not add fluoride to its water supply. And yet they have seen the same declines in tooth decay that we've had here in the US, and today have cavity rates that are often lower than they are here in the US. And the US is one of the most fluoridated countries in the world. So, in short, the benefits of fluoridation have long been exaggerated, and the evidence is becoming clearer and clearer in the scientific literature on that.
Now, I would guess that the pro-fluoride companies that are making profits off of this and getting rid of the waste by putting it into our water, I would guess that they didn't just stand back and say, hey, that's was there pushback leading up to this, the decision by the court, and what are they going to do now?
There wasn't specific pushback on our court case. However, what did happen is in the middle of our case, the court put the case on hold to wait for the publication of a government report on fluoride and IQ being conducted by the National Toxicology Program. The court said, I want to consider their findings, right? So we waited for 2 years. Then I got word from an anonymous source telling me that the National Toxicology Program had finished the report, had tried to publish it, but were blocked. They were instructed to not publish this report. And I immediately filed a number of Freedom of Information Act requests and found the emails that are absolutely black and white, crystal clear orders to the National Toxicology Program that you are not to release this report. So they were blocked from publishing it. And I took those emails and I showed them to the judge. And I said, we can't keep waiting for this report because it may never come out. And the judge agreed. So the judge resumed the case and we went back to trial. So it was a lot of political intrigue that happened as a result. And I think that the fact that the judge had put sort of a spotlight on the National Toxicology Program by saying, like, listen, I want to consider their findings. I think one of the effects of that is that people within the government that didn't want fluoridation to be challenged, they knew that they had to do something about the NTP, and they did, and they worked to block it.
Wow, that was a little divine providence maybe even there. That's when your best weapon steps up and it's your worst all of a sudden, that's kind of damaging to your case. So anyway, your passion and your intelligence on this is really obvious. And I wanted to pull up this book right here and found out, if you look there at the bottom, Paul Connett, and we talked before the show, and this is generational knowledge. You've been around this topic for a little while. You've been fighting this for a little bit. So is there anything else? Before I want to give Rick a chance, I think Rick's falling asleep up there. So is there anything else you want to add about that court case and the outcomes before I move on to Rick?
I would just add, John, that, the EPA, based on this court's order, is under an obligation to take action to eliminate the risk posed by fluoridation. And, but, obviously communities don't need to wait for the EPA to take action. And that's where Rick gets involved, because, when we started fluoridation, this was supposed to be about the teeth and the teeth alone. It was never supposed to be about something that can affect the brain, right? And now that we know that fluoride does affect the brain, I think communities really need to, question, is this something we still want to do, adding a neurotoxicant to our water supply?
And you started to see that there's been some municipalities already that are taking those steps to get it out of their system. And as you mentioned, Rick North, man, Rick's been doing this for years. He looks like a professor. Look at him, but that man's a warrior up there, and he's been fighting this battle for years. We've had some great conversations, haven't we, Rick?
Oh, yeah.
You always want to take it to basketball, but I'm interested in fluoridation.
Well, John, you mentioned your IQ being so high. If you're so smart, why weren't you playing for the Trailblazers instead of the Jazz? That's all I ask. And just a question to put out there.
Mom gave me one too many fluoride pills when I was younger, I think. So there's been a little dent in that armor. So, Rick, you've been battling this. With that, tell us a little bit about how do cities come to want to have fluoride in their systems, and then what that process is. I mean, I know we could go on forever. So, what is the process? How do they apply it? Why would they want to apply it? Go.
And it all comes down to authority figures, because most people don't look at the science or not even hear about the science. What they're hearing, and put yourself in the place of a typical member of a city council or a water board. Those are the people typically making the decisions. What they're going to hear is coming right down from the CDC down to their local health department. You've all heard this more times than you want. Oh, it's safe and effective, and that's what they hear. Well, and they just think, well, if the CDC says this, it must be true. If the American Dental Association says this, must be true. The American Academy of Pediatrics must be true. These are the big three, okay? And typically coming down from them. And your typical person, like any of us, this is the way I used to be. I just thought, I had to study fluoridation. I just thought, well, they're the experts, right? So what they're saying, I'm going to trust them. And unfortunately, our trust has been misplaced. But it is very hard to break through that at the community level. So in terms of how they started, this is how it starts right there. And way back, where this got started, the first experiments were done, back in the late 1940s in Michigan, New York State, comparing a fluoridated city with an unfluoridated city. Well, those experiments were supposed to run for 10 years. Well, in 1950, a little known fact here, because the posture then of the government was, we'll study this, we'll study fluoridation. And 1950, kind of out of the blue, the United States Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation. And right after that, within months, the American Dental Association and the American Public Health Association hopped right on it, and they said the same thing. And within a year, the American Medical Association. So all of a sudden, instead of investigating fluoridation, you had the medical and dental establishment of the United States cheerleading for fluoridation. And when they did, that was the beginning right there in the early 1950s, and it just continued to grow from there.
Well, it's amazing the process, and you and I have battled. You came into Safe Water Spokane. I mean, you bring all sorts of credentials. They've been fighting fluoridation in my hometown of Spokane for some time, and through you, I've learned a bunch of things. Number one, it's a toxic waste. It is something that the aluminum smelting industry and the fertilizer industry had to pay millions of dollars to dispose of this product until, like many other things, they figured out there's a product out of this. And the moment they get to call it a product, particularly a health product, all those bad guy monikers go away, and now it's a great product. So now cities are paying money, paying these people to take the fluoride off their hands and put it in our water. So now it's in our water, poisoning all of us, but especially children, mothers, etc., who can't get away from it, especially the poor who they claim it's helping, because how poor people can't get fluoride on their own. So we got to put it in the water. Rick, you interrupt me and take this for any, but 99% of that goes down in the drain or into our lawns, into our water systems, into our sewers, into our aquifers. 99% of it goes there to be dealt with. It's the most effective, efficient disposal, economic boon to dispose of it probably in history. And we think it's healthy. You want to add anything to that? I know I kind of babbled there.
No. In fact, when I tell people about the toxic waste aspect, it's so incredible. I always say, look, I know this is going to be hard to believe, but it's a matter of public record. You can't take this stuff from the phosphate fertilizer industry and just put it in the air. It's a toxic waste. Dump it in a lake or in the river or wherever. You can't do that. It has to go to a toxic waste or a hazardous waste facility unless you sell it to a city for fluoridation, or in some cases, they can use it for industrial use. It's so corrosive. It is used to etch glass. This is when you're a water operator, you got to wear protective equipment because this stuff is so corrosive. So it's just kind of amazing. When I first got into this, it's the toughest messaging issue I've ever seen. And I've worked in a lot of, I've been an activist most of my life. I like to get involved in things, not so much with candidates, more issues that I believe in. And working for the American Cancer Society, because I worked for them for 21 years, and what took me to Oregon was I became the director of the American Cancer Society in Oregon. So I've been with the mainstream kind of for many, many years. And after that, I worked with Physicians for Social Responsibility. So I worked with doctors and scientists kind of most of my life. But it's just amazing with this particular issue. It's not, the difficulty is, it's not like you don't have talking points. It's that you've got so many of them. You don't have time or space to get into all the reasons why fluoridation is such a bad thing. Go back in my career with the Cancer Society. It's like the tobacco industry. Okay. It was easy. In terms of messaging, everybody knows cigarette smoking causes lung cancer and heart disease and emphysema. Everybody knows that. The whole medical establishment knows that. You're just on very easy, solid ground. And nobody likes the tobacco industry very much. So it was easy. But my God, with fluoridation, there are so many reasons to oppose it. And it's the waste factor. The 99, I have a doctor that I work with saying it's like prescribing 100 pills to a patient, and then you throw away 99 of them and say, take this one pill. And even that one's not effective. So, it just doesn't make any sense. In Spokane, the cost, $11 million to fluoridate Spokane. Here, Spokane having all kinds of budget issues. So this is why, we were able to stop it. The city council tried to ram it through during COVID and say, oh, COVID's an emergency and kids aren't going to the dentist as much. We gotta push through fluoridation really quick. Well, we were able to stop that. That was like 4 years ago, and been working out of it ever since, putting it off, and it is on the back burner now, but it's still on the burner. That's the problem. But it is just amazing. And so part of it is our messaging, the cost, the waste, the IQ. It's not just the IQ. There's significant science. Thyroid, hypothyroidism, causing your thyroid function to go down. A lot of science on this.
Right, the thyroid gets stripped of iodine, right? That was my understanding, by the fluoride. And all these people I know now have thyroid damage, and all these people are being treated for thyroid. And what's the first holistic treatment for it? Iodine. So, and that's what's being stripped by the fluoride. So like you said, that's just another of so many arguments you can make. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, it's just the ineffectiveness is another argument. Here's something that most people don't know. I didn't know, before I actually started looking at this issue, because the mainstream media, the impression you get from them and the medical and dental establishment is, oh my gosh, everybody's fluoridating, and if you don't, what's wrong with you? Are you some kind of anti-science wacko? Well, what they don't tell you is that fluoridation is one of the most widely rejected health interventions in the world. 196 countries out of those, 24 fluoridate at all. And only 10 of those for more than half their population, like the U.S. The U.S. fluoridates as many people as the rest of the world combined. It's been Europe. Nearly 98% of Europeans drink unfluoridated water. And country after country has banned it. France, Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, they won't even allow it. And for the countries that do allow it, virtually unanimously, their cities and towns will have no part of it. They just think it is totally absurd to put a drug, and this has been, it's defined and regulated as a drug, and, because it's meant to prevent, in this case, cavities. To administer a drug through the drinking water, any drug, is just plain nuts. Okay? Now, think of what happens when you go to a doctor, okay? And you've got some health problem, and the doctor diagnoses you and says, okay, I'm going to prescribe some pills. This is based on your particular individual medical condition. It's based on your sex, based on your size, your medical history. And the doctor will give you, say, these pills, a specific dose for a specific period of time. And it has to be contamination-free, approved by the FDA. And the doctor will tell you, here are the benefits that I think will come from taking these pills. And here are the potential side effects, harmful side effects, because virtually every drug has side effects. Okay? This is standard common sense medical protocol. This is informed consent. Okay? When you go to the doctor. So take this drug and dump it in the drinking water. Every single one of these common sense medical protocols is out the window. And, fluoride is the only drug, in the world, being administered like this. The only one. Because this is another rabbit hole you can go down. Fluoride, the FDA, they will regulate fluoride as a drug. Like, here's Crest toothpaste, okay? And on the back, here's this warning, right? For using a pea-size, for children under 6, just use a pea-size amount is what they're saying. But it says, if more than brushing is accidentally swallowed, get medical help or contact a poison control center right away. This is how toxic fluoride is if it's ingested. Okay, the reason that warning is on this Crest or whatever fluoridated toothpaste you're using is because the FDA requires it. It's regulating as a drug. Now, once it gets in the water, the FDA stops regulating it, and then it gets turned over to the EPA as a contaminant, which it is, but it's still being used as a drug. Okay, to put any drug in drinking water to administer, it's crazy. And yet, I have to freely admit, I never thought of this until I actually started looking at this issue. And most people haven't either. So, yes, like I said, there are so many arguing points against fluoridation. You can't get to all of them, so you have to pick and choose which ones, because you only have so much time. Or if you're writing something like an op-ed, something like that, you have to kind of concentrate on just a few.
Well, I want you to get back in a minute, Rick, to city council and stuff. But I saw Michael kind of. So let's not forget that. Let me get back to it. Michael, you were kind of looking like you almost wanted to talk about it. There's some legal issues in there that looks like you were ready to chomp at the bit. Do you want to add something to that?
A couple things. First, with the toothpaste piece, it's now recommended for children under 3 to only use a smear of paste on the brush, which is otherwise called a rice grain. Now, how many people do you know when they put the paste on their kid's brush, how many people are using a smear or a rice grain? But that's how much the American Dental Association and the CDC now recommend for young kids because of the problems with swallowing fluoride. But when Rick was talking about the problem with adding a drug to the water, I wanted just to add there that that's one of the main reasons why Europe didn't fluoridate. is because they looked at this and said, people have fluoride available to them in toothpaste and dental products they get at the grocery store. The government should not be administering medicine through the water supply. And in 2005, I actually had the opportunity to go to Sweden, and I met with Dr. Arvid Carlsson, who's a Nobel Prize winner for medicine and physiology. And Dr. Carlsson had led the campaign against water fluoridation in Sweden in the 1970s, and he succeeded. Sweden said no fluoridation. And I asked him why he was opposed to this. And he laughed. He's like, this policy is so absurd. It violates all principles of modern pharmacology. You're taking a drug which works topically, not systemically, and you're putting it in people's drinking water where they swallow it. And you're taking away that right to choose which medicine to use. So, here in the United States, we have a very tunnel vision view of fluoride. We think of it as this modern marvel, this great achievement in public health. And what would we have done had we not added fluoride to our water? We would have a big problem with tooth decay, right? But if you just broaden the lens and you just look across the pond, right? Just look across the pond to Europe, and they don't fluoridate. Their teeth are just as good as ours, actually usually better, lower tooth decay rates. So we have a very tunnel visioned, I think, view on fluoride, especially the dental community does here in the U.S.
Well, I also like that they put this apparatus at the tune of millions of dollars. They put this apparatus so that we can add stuff to our water at a whim. And it only takes one nut to add something to the entire water system. I don't know why we don't see the peril in that. We shouldn't have any apparatus by which to add to our water. It's already scary enough, and it's such an important thing. Another point, the ADA, the American Dental Association, became the American Dental Association. 8 out of 9 doctors survey said you need the fluoride, but they became it during the amalgam wars way, way back, century ago. And their battle was, and they won, was to be able to get mercury amalgams into teeth. It was cheaper and safer and better. And we all know now how deadly and horrible mercury amalgams have been. So the whole ADA has been built off of that premise, and they continue it with pushing the fluoride. It just seems, I think of Robert Kennedy coming through now under President Trump, how vital this is to have some wisdom in these offices making these choices and calling out the truth a little bit. Rick, back to you. City councils.
City councils, yes.
Ours in particular, self-admitted, very liberal, right? It's off balance, and it has been for some time. A company by the name of Alcoa comes in, says what they're offering $4 million for a study.
Arcora,
Okay.
Alcoa would be a aluminum company. Arcora Foundation, which is the philanthropic, if you want to call it that, branch of Delta Dental of Washington State. So they have been a foremost funder and promoter of fluoridation. Spokane is, I should say something about the politics here. Because oftentimes it's interesting. Well, let me come back to this Spokane though for a minute, because I just want to say something you touched on before, John, about one person, about what one person can do, kind of get this going. In Hillsboro, Oregon, which we just won a citywide vote. Okay, big, 58 to 42%. There was an advisory vote, but the Utilities Commission, which will make the final decision, should absolutely go along with that vote. How did this started? It started from one pediatrician. One pediatrician had a child, patient, and saw a lot of cavities in this kid's mouth. And she first heard all, what she gets from the mainstream medical establishment. In fact, oh my gosh, and this kid is growing up in Hillsboro, unfluoridated, just thinking, there was towns adjacent to Hillsboro that do fluoridate. Just thinks, if only this kid had grown up in a fluoridated town, I wouldn't be seeing this. Now, I mean, she's well intentioned, and I want to say that most people that promote fluoridation are well intentioned. I mean, there aren't that many villains out here at the local level. I mean, nobody wants kids to have cavities. Nobody wants kids to have brain damage. They're well intentioned, but they are very, very misinformed and uninformed. And this pediatrician goes to the city council and she wants them to fluoridate the water. Okay, so look at what's happening. My gosh, this is terrible. And now they decide not to. They could have, but they punted like some city councils do. And so, well, it's a hot potato. We're just going to let it go to an advisory vote by the population, by the city voters, and then we'll go with that. Okay, that's how this got started. But the things they say, and I can tell you this, the fluoridation promoters in Hillsborough, okay, they contracted with a professional campaign firm. Okay? They raised, that I know of right now, about $51,000. Half of that money went to this political firm. And I just want to read you something that they said. Here's straight from their website. Okay, this is the measure 34338. Cavities, pain, and dental infections are at remarkably higher rates compared to our neighbors. Okay, remarkably high rates. This is total BS. Okay, that's what they put on their website. That is the basis of their entire campaign. And it's like you said before, John or Ken, one of you said it, I think. It's the poor kids argument. Oh my God, these poor kids, the poor low-income families, they can't afford to go to the dentist. They're really the ones that need this the most. Okay. Now, we had a couple of our volunteers email in to the Healthy Teeth website, say, we're looking at this, guys. Do you have any data on that? Any statistical information? Never heard back at all. Okay. And there isn't any. There is no data on this. And you heard from Michael, I mean, the data, the Cochrane collaboration, it's virtually, if it's any effect at all, fluoridation, it's very, very minimal. You're talking 3 or 4%, maybe, that's it. And maybe not at all. Okay. And they're talking significantly high. And this is what they're putting out to the public, and they usually fall for it, unfortunately, hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, unless you're out there debunking this. And that's what we were able to do. And we had a couple of dentists on our campaign. Not always easy to get one. There are a lot of them out there that are opposed to fluoridation. You know why they don't speak out? They're scared to speak. Because they're afraid that they're going to lose their colleagues and the dental society who still are buying into this safe and effective kind of soundbite. And they're just afraid of the controversy that I can create, and I don't want to put them up there.
Well, we saw that too, Rick, right? We saw that with COVID. And when you were in Spokane doing all this stuff, you and I talked, and I said, gosh, this is the same battle Ken and I are doing with the COVID stuff. Doctors can't speak out or they lose their license. It's incredible the power they have. And then I don't want to ignore the ARCOA, because in Spokane they offer. I mean, you get hooked. They offered the city, any municipality, $4 million to do this study, and if you go ahead then and implement it, you don't have to pay the $4 million back. So now the $11 million project you've just got free money. It gave it to you.
Yeah.
But if you choose against it, you now have to pay that $4 million back. And so, I mean, you guys know what it's like. If somebody gives you a gift certificate or something, you're spending every last cent of that. Otherwise, you're kind of cheating yourself. So it's human nature. Once you're invested to that level, you're going to try to push it through. So now you have allies in the city council. Thankfully, our mayor stepped up and said, no, we're not going that route. Our past mayor. stepped up and said, no, we're not going that route. We're if you do us for not paying back, we'll do the study. So I think they went ahead with the study, but as you mentioned, economics stepped in and saved the day.
Yeah, and that's why it's on the back burner. Now, every city is different, like Spokane, cost, big issue. Albany, New York, cost is not an issue because the New York State Department of Health will often fund through grants the cost of implementing or building the equipment, the capital cost for fluoridation. But Albany, New York right now, it's just city council. They voted to fluoridate. We did everything we could to stop back in February. They voted to fluoridate. Of course, this was before the National Toxicology Program report. 18 out of 19, the highest quality studies. 18 out of 19, the higher the fluoride, the lower IQ. And many of them, again, funded by the National Institutes of Health. You don't get those grants very easily. They're high quality. Many of them at levels in fluoridated water or just slightly above. That hadn't come out when they voted to fluoridate. And then the judgment from the lawsuit. Hey, this is an unreasonable risk to human health based on lowering IQs in kids. I mean, just blockbuster information. And just to tell you what can happen, the leader of the fluoridationists promoters on the city council, he said, well, because we brought up, like, this judge is going to be issuing this decision pretty soon. It took longer than we thought, that's for sure. He said, well, hey, if the lawsuit goes against the EPA, well, of course, that's a direct quote, of course, that I and the city council, would, withdraw this ordinance to Florida. Well, guess what? The lawsuit came out on our side, and this city council person, he's done no such thing. This is what we're fighting now in Albany, New York, is to get the city council members to reverse their vote to fluoridate because they're on their way to doing it. It does take some time, and they've applied for the grants to New York State. So every city can be different. That's why, the talking points, the main messaging, it's going to depend on your local conditions, your local volunteers. So it is, it's a battle, but I can tell you, communities, I just got this in yesterday morning. Stuart Cooper, the director of the Fluoride Action Network, which I would highly recommend. These people are wonderful. I work with them almost on a daily basis. This is the leading organization, really, in the world opposing fluoridation. Fluoridealert.org. Fluoridealert.org. Okay? So I just got this in because Stu, the director there, this is a list. This is since the website. Since the lawsuit of communities across the country, and it goes on the back here, that have either stopped fluoridation in response to the lawsuit ruling or are discussing it. A number of them have stopped it or they're on their way or putting it on pause saying, wait a minute, we got to look at this. Or just debating it. They're just bringing it up now. I counted them up. There are 34 around the country. So we are seeing this based on the science and the lawsuit ruling. It's growing and it's growing and it's growing. So it is, this is what can happen. So it can be very, very frustrating at the local level. You're running into this, people just accept the authority figures from the U.S. government and the Dental Association. And they get their talking points from them. And here's one, by the way. This is classic fluoridationist talking point. Okay? So they've lost the election in Hillsborough. So here's what they posted on Instagram. Why did they lose? Because, quote, skeptics have long used misinformation and scare tactics regarding fluoridation, and it appears they have succeeded again. Okay? That's it. And you try to brand you with, misinformation, scare tactics. this is what they're using. This is what they're using, and they then project it onto us.
I think our trust in our public figures is waning. I don't think that we're just automatically accepting what the FDA says or the CDC says. And if we're not a little bit leery of any grants at this point, there's something wrong with this as well. I mean, they all come with strings attached, even the ones that sound the best and the healthiest and, God bless America type stuff. You better check the fine print because there are strings attached. So, Michael, back to you. Is there an appeal coming to this? You win, but I'm getting so used to court cases just being a matter of opinion. Who can last it out with more money? Are we done with this now?
Well, EPA has to make a decision, and they haven't yet, as to whether they're going to appeal. So we don't know. Now, certainly with the new administration coming in, if the new administration wants to end fluoridation, this case gives them a very clear pathway to do so, because they can do two things. The new administration could say, we're not going to appeal the court's order, and we're going to have the EPA initiate this rulemaking proceeding quickly, right? Because the EPA, through that rulemaking proceeding, has the absolute unquestionable power to end fluoridation. So that if the new administration wants to end this practice, it can do so through this EPA rulemaking procedure.
Just like that?
Yeah.
Just like that?
Well, it will be a process. It couldn't just be like on day one, they say we ban fluoridation under this statute. What they would need to do is initiate a proceeding where they would propose a rule. For instance, we're proposing prohibiting water fluoridation and joining the rest of most of the Western world. And then they would have to allow public comment, consider those comments, and then implement the rule. So there has to be a process to it. But that would be the clearest, cleanest pathway for a new administration to end fluoridation is through this TSCA proceeding.
I tell you, when Rick was talking, I thought a little bit of the movie Dumb and Dumber when he said, like, I think it was 85% of the world doesn't fluoridate, and yet the pro fluoridation folks are saying, we're killing it. But they only have 20%. It's like when the guy said, when he was told that he has a 1 in a million chance of ever having a date with this guy, he goes, so I have a chance. The logic is out the window. So it's good to see that logic's prevailing a little bit. Finally, good to see that the administration might be in favor of what you guys have all been pushing for some time. Michael, your whole life, Rick, your warrior activities of late. So we've covered a lot of ground. Is there something you think's vital for our listeners to hear about fluoridation?
What I've been thinking about, is like I brought this case against the EPA on one health effect, neurotoxicity, principally IQ loss, right? So that was the whole case. And I think now a part of me is thinking I might want to bring another case against the EPA on bone disease from fluoride, arthritis and bone fracture, and say with the same argument that fluoridation presents an unreasonable risk of those effects. I'm pretty convinced that I would win that case based on the science on bone disease. But we probably don't need to go there since we're probably going to get, we've already established that there's an unreasonable risk for IQ loss. But I say that because, as Rick mentioned earlier, when we're talking about fluoride in health, it's not just IQ loss, although that's very significant by itself, right? We have a number of other chronic health effects that are known to be caused by fluoride. And I think in terms of some of the effects with the strongest amount of evidence would be arthritis, joint pain, joint stiffness, calcification of the ligaments. There's no question that fluoride causes that. It's only the question of the dose, right? And bone fracture, same thing. We know that excess fluoride weakens bone and causes bone fracture, and including a hip fracture. So I just think it's important that while the IQ studies are at the forefront, we don't lose sight of the fact that there are these other chronic health problems linked to fluoride. And I do believe if I had a case just on bone disease, we would get the same ruling, unreasonable risk.
You think about it, if you mentioned thyroid earlier, if you destroy the thyroid, what functions does that particular gland have to do with the whole organism that is your body? It's one thing. You could probably trace this out, get with some holistic doctors and trace out all kinds of things, including the bone damage.
Well, one thing we do know for sure is that if the mother has hypothyroidism during pregnancy, that will absolutely cause neurological damage to the child, including IQ loss. One of the things you're seeing in the scientific literature is that we know that fluoride can affect the thyroid gland, and that could explain the impact of fluoride on IQ, at least in part, not totally, but one mechanism by which fluoride could be altering IQ.
Wow. Well, I tell you, your dad, I have no doubt Michael's very proud of you. He obviously put a lifetime into his work on this, and to see you carrying it out and possibly change the world in one swoop is something you should be proud of. I'm sure he is. And Rick, other than you being a Trailblazers fan, you're not a bad guy.
Listen, I've forgiven you for playing for the Jazz instead of the Blazers. I've forgiven you, okay? So, so that's one thing I wanted to say right off the go Blazers, not Celtics, not Jazz, Blazers. Okay, that's one point I wanted to make. The second point, because this can get politicized, and so what can you do? I mean, I would recommend anybody at the local level just get together with 2 or 3 of your friends. First of all, look at Fluoride Action Network. Look at their website. Just educate yourself on the basics, and then go to your city council. But get 2 or 3 of your friends. Don't try to do it by yourself. Just to get started and start gathering. I mean, this is an outrage that this is being allowed to be done. It's just an outright outrage. Okay, and again, it can get politicized. Like, is this a Democrat thing, a Republican thing with RFK Jr. or not? You have to understand something, because especially the media tend to put people in these little boxes, And I can just tell you this: November 2012, Wichita, Kansas, very much Republican, conservative. Votes against fluoridation, 60 to 40%, a landslide. Okay, Wichita. So you think, okay, well, and statistically, Republicans do have, a higher rate of opposing fluoridation than Democrats, but this is no straitjacket kind of thing here. So Wichita does. 6 months later, Portland, Oregon, okay, May 2013. Now, Portland is about as Democratic, liberal as you can get. I mean, they don't call it the People's Republic of Multnomah County for nothing, okay? And so Portland, Oregon goes Wichita one better, 61 to 39% against fluoridation. So that the beauty and the challenge of being a anti-fluoridation activism is that you got people who will disagree with each other on almost anything else, but they've all come together on this issue because they're all saying that this is just flat out wrong. It's unethical, especially for low-income families that cannot afford an expensive filter or bottled water to avoid it. So this, I guess is just as much as anything a call to action. By the way, Albany, New York, if you're out there listening, and please contact the Fluoride Action Network. There's a way to email them. Just say you want to volunteer for Albany, New York, because we need more volunteers. This is what I recommend. Just don't put up with this. You don't have to. It's fight back. They're taking your choice of clean, safe water away from you. Don't let them take that choice away. Fight back and get what's rightfully yours.
Well said. Well said. Why don't you say, how do you want people to reach you?
You can email the Fluoride Action Network, contact their website. I can give you my email, and I don't mind doing that right now. If you don't mind, it's hrnorth, North, at Hevanet, HEVANET.com. Just contact me. I don't mind putting that out there. And, and especially if you're from the Albany area in New York, we can really use some more volunteers. We just had a meeting last night. So it's outrageous what's happening there. They said that they would take away the legislation to fluoridate if the lawsuit went our way, and they don't. And that's wrong.
Well, I've got a question. So you're in a city where there's fluoride in the water. What do you recommend for families that want to drink clean water without the toxins of fluoride in it?
My recommendation would be, if you can afford it, to get, spring water delivered to your house in 5-gallon jugs with have a water cooler. To me, that's the most convenient way. And you also get, you can get, high quality spring water. Just make sure you call the company beforehand and ask them what the fluoride level is. You definitely want the fluoride level below, 0.2, but ideally be below 0.1 parts per million. You can also filter fluoride out of the tap. However, you should know that Brita filters do not remove fluoride. Pure water filters do not remove fluoride. And most of the filters in your refrigerator will not remove fluoride. That's because activated carbon filters do not remove fluoride. In order to remove fluoride, you need a sort of higher grade technology like reverse osmosis. That is effective at removing fluoride, but you got to be careful about replacing the cartridges on an ongoing basis to ensure that it's working properly. So those are some of the things. And you can also get a countertop distillation unit that will remove fluoride as well. So those are some options. I have the good fortune of living here in New Hampshire, so I can go to, there's a local spring, which is, to me, it's like if you can get spring water, it's good. It's spring. I mean, this is time tested, right? It's coming through the rocks. It's good, So I have that, which is great. But obviously if you're in a big city, you don't have that option. So going for bottled water, I would add on the bottled water front, your ideal setup. This is the ideal. Okay, it's not for everyone, but your ideal setup would be to get those 5-gallon jugs in glass. Because glass, you don't worry about any of the plastic, right? Because there are some concerns about, potential plastic residue. And I don't know enough to know the validity of those concerns. But one thing, if you're getting your water in glass, that's as good as it gets. Like that is the highest quality you can get. You get spring water with low fluoride in glass. That's golden, but it's, obviously that's not going to be an option for everybody, but that's your number one.
And that would be my recommendation too. I have a again, most countertops, they just don't work. They may be very effective at taking out other contaminants. They just don't take out fluoride just because the nature of the molecules. I have something called, and this is not ideal, and I would like to get that exactly. Either a countertop reverse osmosis, or this one I have is called a clearly filtered, which it's effective to some degree, not as much as they say it is, but I've had it tested by an independent lab here in Massachusetts, and it removes most of the fluoride. You have to keep replacing the filters. It's expensive. Low-income families could not afford this. Every 3 months, you got to replace the filters. And they're not cheap. So it's removing typically around 70 to 80% of the fluoride, which is most of what we get here. If I was a pregnant woman, I'd want something strong. I'm not. So that's where I am. But I'd rather not mention it.
Sure. Hey, Michael, I've got a question regarding using water. You're boiling vegetables, you're steaming them, and what kind of how do you do that in a healthy way? Is there something special used for a pot or a pan?
Here's my suggestion there. When you boil water, it will concentrate the fluoride because the fluoride doesn't evaporate out. It concentrates within the water. So that's one thing to be mindful of. But so if you're cooking food, boiling with water, if that water ultimately gets incorporated into the food, like say you're making rice, right, where all that water is going into your rice, then I think it's smart to use filtered water, right? But if you're boiling vegetables where, you're just dumping out the water after you boil the vegetables, that I don't use filtered water for that, because while there might be some marginal increase in the fluoride content in the vegetable, it's very minor. So just think when you're boiling or when you're using water for food, just ask yourself, is this water really getting into the food in a significant way or not? If it is, I would probably use filtered water. If it's not, normal tap water is fine. In terms of cookware, one thing to be mindful of is Teflon, the non-stick pans, that can release fluoride into your food. It is a fluorinated chemical, and with excessive heat, studies have found that it can increase the fluoride content of your food. So that's one thing to be mindful of.
It sounds like you could steam it. If fluoride and other chemicals don't go up with the steam, if you could have water in the bottom and steam it, that might be the home run.
Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely not going to be getting any fluoride when you do that.
With RFK and President Trump taking over, do you think there's a chance that we're actually going to get fluoridation out of the water?
I think it sounds like there's a chance, certainly if RFK gets a high-level position in the new administration. So that's the first key thing, I think, to happen. But, with what RFK said in his tweet was on day one, they would advise municipalities across the country to stop fluoridation. So he wasn't saying that the administration is going to ban fluoridation, unilaterally on day one, but it was going to be about providing people with the current science and explaining why water fluoridation no longer makes sense. I think that, from my reading of RFK's tweet, that's the intention. Now, the administration could certainly go further than that and ban fluoridation under this rulemaking proceeding, but that would have to come later. They could not do that on day one.
Sounds like Washington, Oregon, and California would find a way to add it if the government if the federal government canceled it. So anyway,
now Oregon is the third least fluoridated state in the country at around 22%. So Oregon is right up there. We have stopped fluoridation in city votes in Portland, in Newport, in Hillsborough, and now just recently also along with Hillsborough 11. So Oregon's got a terrific track record of stopping it. So just want to say that you can take the boy out of Oregon, but you can't take the Oregon out of the boy. I just want you to know that, okay?
Well, Rick, Michael, thanks again for coming on the show. We sure appreciate your wisdom and sharing it with us today. How do you want people to reach you? That's the important thing. Michael, do you want people calling your office every day? I'd be surprised.
Well, I have recently set up a Twitter page where I've been posting information about fluoride, including deposition clips of the experts in the case. So if people want to, keep up with some of the current developments going on with the lawsuit and whatnot, you can find me on Twitter, Michael P. Connett.
I don't have a Twitter page. I get enough information as it is every day, so just through my email. I will say my email again, HR North, like the opposite of South, at Evanet, HEVANET.com.
Well, you guys have lived up to your billing. Thank you for coming on the show. This has been you've been a wealth of information, and congratulations, Michael. Keep up the great work. Same with you, Rick. We're proud to be part of the group. So thanks.
Thank you.
Ken, thank you both. I really appreciate it.
Well, that's all for the Ultimate Assist, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and let's keep fluoride out of our water.
Hey, so join our team at the Ultimate Assist and subscribe. And man, you can get access to us on Rumble, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, X. Make sure you subscribe so you can get that information and you get alerts and you know what we're talking about, when we're talking about them, and you get the latest insights that I think will help you with your freedom and navigating this crazy world and this society. When you sign up, we'll give you news and information and some exclusive access to some of the conversations and dialogues that aren't typically broadcast, but kind of a special inside look and perspectives that John and I have in our dialogue. So join the Ultimate Assist, join the team, the community. You can find us online at theultimateassist.com, and I look forward to being part of the team with you. Special thanks to our production team for making this possible. Our podcast manager is Janet Bueller. Our guest relations co-coordinator is Stacy Stockton. Our producer, sound engineer, and editor is Elliot Foster. And our graphics and animation by Sean Coyne.